Good afternoon. My name is Rohan Williamson. I'm a professor of finance here at Georgetown University. And as everyone else has, I want to welcome you all here, and those for the first time, those that are back for another year of this fantastic conference. Welcome back to Georgetown. And this afternoon, just to continue with an outstanding day, we're going to have another one of our fireside chats. But that will be with Robert Cook, who is President and CEO of FINRA and Chairman of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. Prior to that, he served as the Director of the Division of Trading and Markets of the SEC from 2010 to 13. Under his direction, the division was responsible for regulatory policy and oversight with respect to broker-dealers, securities and exchange and markets, clearing agencies, and FINRA. In addition, the division reviewed and acted on proposed rule findings and new product listings from self-regulatory organizations, including the SEC and FINRA, and was responsible for implementing a range of initiatives and studies generated by the Dodd-Frank and Jobs Act. He also directed the staff's review of equity market structure. Prior to that, he was a partner at an international law firm where his practice focused on regulation of security markets and market intermediaries, including securities firms, exchanges, alternative trading systems, and clearing agencies. During his years in private practice, he also worked extensively on broker-dealer regulation, advising large and small firms on a wide range of compliance matters. We welcome Robert Cook to Georgetown. He earned his JD from the Harvard Law School, a master's from the London School of Economics, and also an undergraduate from Harvard College. And the moderator today is Hillary Sale, and we want to welcome her here to Georgetown. She's a fantastic addition to our law school, and she also works with Robert, and she's going to do whatever she can to make him look good. Okay, Hillary.
Thank you. I don't think it'll be that hard to make Robert look good, I have to say. So just in the interest of full disclosure, I am a member of the FINRA Board of Governors. I'm a public governor on the board.
So I work for Hillary. Hillary doesn't work for me.
Right, so could you make me look good?
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so I'm going to say what I believe in simple terms FINRA does, and then I'm going to ask Robert if he wants to elaborate on that. Obviously, what FINRA does in large measure is investor protection and market integrity taken together. And I, in fact, write in this area, and one of the things that I always say is that no one wants to play in a rigged market. Nobody wants to be in the market if they think it's patently unfair. So that's what regulation does on some level, is ensure integrity, build confidence, and that way you get more participation, and more participation actually contributes to market efficiency. But let's see what Robert wants to say about that.
Well, hard to add to that, but let me start by thanking the faculty at Georgetown and Rena and everyone else for inviting me here today, and congratulations on adding such a terrific new member to your faculty. So yes, investor protection, market integrity. I also think that part of our mission is to do that in a way that facilitates vibrant capital markets. I also think, sometimes people wonder, how is FINRA set up, and where did it come from? And so I think it's useful to add that FINRA is a nonprofit entity. We operate under a regulatory regime established by Congress for the frontline regulation of securities brokers and dealers. And we do this under the close oversight of the SEC. The broker-dealers have to become our members, and we write rules, we examine for compliance with those rules, and we bring enforcement proceedings to ensure compliance with those rules. And then, we do a lot in the way of oversight of markets. I think we're going to talk some more about that. But I think in that context, it's useful to remind people that we don't actually operate a market ourselves. We are, as a not-for-profit entity, we don't actually engage in the intermediating transactions. We regulate our members, and we provide other sorts of market surveillance oversight, but we're not actually engaging in market transactions ourselves.
So Robert and I thought we might actually sort of start first with sort of FINRA's role in the concept, right, in the context of recent volatility. And and maybe talk a little bit about sort of what some of those key challenges are for regulators in that space and what it really means to be a regulator, which Robert has already said something about, right? And in particular saying we don't actually participate in the market ourselves, but we do a lot of other things that we want to talk about a little bit and sort of put them in the zone of the recent volatility in the market.
I think it's a great place to start because I imagine it's on a lot of people's minds, right? Anyone check their 401k lately or daily?
No.
Yeah. It can be very unsettling when the markets have this much trading activity. And it's natural for people to ask, especially a regulator, so what's going on? What's next? And I think the key thing to remind people of is that regulators aren't always the best place to go to really understand the economics of recent market events, and we definitely aren't good predictors of what's going to happen because markets are going to go up and down, right? That's what they do. Our job as regulators is to ensure that they're operating properly. And what that means is that they're operating in a fair, efficient, and orderly manner in a way that will help provide a useful mechanism for price discovery and for trading activity. And so ultimately the goal is to provide investors and issuers confidence that the markets are working well. It's not our goal to maintain a certain equilibrium in the markets per se or to ensure they always go up. When you're facing difficult market environments like we've been seeing recently, it's hard enough to figure out what to buy and sell, right? But the point is that once you decide to buy or sell something, once you click the mouse or you hang up the phone with your advisor, you want to stop worrying at that point about whether how's your order going to get executed. You want the rest of the process to take care of it yourself. And that's where our work really begins to make sure that your order is executed fairly and along with the orders of everyone else in the markets.
And it turns out that that process, which I knew something about before going on the board, but actually know more about now, is way more complicated and complex than I would have thought. In part, that's just because of the massive amount of data, but it's also because of all of the different kinds of markets and the ways in which they've changed. And one of the things Robert and I were talking about when we were getting ready to come here today was this difference between the 2010 flash crash and where FINRA was as a regulator then and where the markets were and what they were then as compared to now. And both what FINRA does now and what the markets are now are both very different. And the power, and I don't mean power like regulatory power, I mean data power that FINRA has at this point in time is really quite impressive. And so maybe we could turn there next and talk a little bit about sort of what comes into FINRA and what FINRA does with it.
Sure. Well, and just to lay a little backdrop even for that is to the point you mentioned about the challenges that face regulators today. So the markets have evolved in tremendous ways, going way back before the flash crash in 2010, right? And two key elements of that have been advances in technology, which have clearly made a lot of innovation possible, but also have increased the speed and volume of trading in the market so that we're measuring orders in milliseconds and volumes in millions. And at the same time, the trend towards greater fragmentation, and I don't use that in a negative way, but more venues at which you can execute. Trading in a stock does not happen primarily on one exchange. There are multiple exchanges where the trading can occur, and then there are multiple off-exchange trading venues, alternative trading systems, broker-dealers. That increases the complexity. Now, the complexity has had lots of great benefits for investors, and the extent of those benefits, I think, are things that people like to debate all the time, and I think the more interesting question for this conversation is what does it mean for regulators? And it does mean that it makes our job harder to kind of ensure that the public has confidence in the ability of regulators to oversee this complex market. But that's ultimately what FINRA has been working on to ensure we can do. So you asked about sort of the data and how that's changed. So at the time of the flash crash, the 2010, FINRA was receiving in data only on NASDAQ-listed stocks from NASDAQ, and only about FINRA member firms. If you fast forward today, FINRA has worked closely with the exchanges to pull in a much broader array of trading activity. So we now pull in information on all 8,000 NMS stocks. We pull it in from all the exchanges, all the equity exchanges except one, and all the options exchanges, so 99-point-something% of the equity trading volume. We pull in information on depth of book, so what's the trading interest below the best price available at an exchange or an ATS. And we bring in data from 1,100 reporting broker-dealers at the same time. So as you can imagine, this is a lot of data. And by the way, FINRA also pulls in data on fixed income trading, so corporate bonds, treasury bonds, and through the MSRB, we get in information on munis. Altogether, on any given day, there may be 42,000 different products that we're pulling in data on, and the scope of our coverage covers 2.4 million different securities. So there's a lot of data, and we couldn't do it but for being in the cloud. We have a cloud computing environment to be able to process all of this data. And our numbers have been increasing in terms of the number of message traffic. So far this year, it's been about 58 billion messages a day that we process. During some of the high volatility days that we've been talking about, especially in the last couple of weeks, we had one day when we're up above 135 billion messages in a single day. And without any, it's not like people even knew this was happening because it all happens automatically. It's not like we have to add extra power or something to do that. The system's configured to be able to accommodate that type of message traffic.
It's a massive amount of data. I can't even and you can't actually visualize 107 billion or 135 billion messages. I mean, if you just think about sort of spreadsheet technology, it's ridiculous to think about in the context of the amount of data that FINRA is taking in. And all of that data allows FINRA to do an incredible amount of analytics and spot problems, in some cases really, and be predictive about potential areas, but also manage things as they come up and share feedback with the members. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about sort of, we get a whole bunch of raw data in,
yep.
and I've actually been to here, Rockville, to the facility to sort of see how they do this on one of our board informational tours, so to speak. And it's quite amazing what they're doing there. And maybe you can just walk us through a little bit the analytic process and the normalization of the data.
Sure, and it really begins with the normalization because this data wasn't, the data structure was not created for it all to be looked at in tandem. So what we do is we have to go through this process called normalizing, which means kind of taking all the apples and oranges and turning them into one common data set so that an order type on one exchange matches an order type on another exchange. And that's not a one and done process. It's something we constantly have to do. Get the data all normalized. And then as Hillary said, there's way too much data here for a human eye to discern anything from. So we have a number of tools that are designed to help our market and regulatory experts understand how to interpret what they're seeing. One of these tools is a series of what we call patterns, which are algorithms that we run on the data to look for bad behavior. We run hundreds of these, and we're looking for things like insider trading, market manipulation, failure to comply with market rules. And these patterns can generate alerts, which then a market expert would take a look at. And the tools they have to do that have to also be very sophisticated. So, for example, we have visualization tools. So the analyst can pick a certain period of time and sort of have the data be presented in a way that visually draws your eye to something like, oh, that's something I need to look at. Even I've seen some of these tools. I wish I could take everyone in to see this because you would be able to tell where there's something unusual in the data using these visualization tools. And then they also have the ability to look, as you said, the many, many rows of data. Excel, I think, can get to 1 million rows of data. We can get into the trillions of rows of data. And they're able to look by, into like a particular stock, particular time, particular venue, and sort of zoom in and see. It's I like to think of it a little bit like Street View in Google Maps, where you can kind of go in and see not just what's happening at one point of time, but hey, what's been happening to this building or broker, over a period of time, and have again those visualization tools. The point is that to create through all these linkages and normalization, to create a virtual view of the market so that we can follow the life cycle of an order when it goes from being entered at a broker-dealer to routed to split up into many different child orders. Sometimes a single order has thousands of different events that follow it before it's ultimately executed. That's just one order. And so then when the analysts see something, they begin potentially doing an investigation or some type of follow-up examination, and we do bring enforcement proceedings based on the data that or issues that we see, or we make referrals to the SEC where we don't have the authority. I think 2 points I'd mention. One is that we do this in cooperation with the exchanges. This is something where we're getting the data from them as part of agreements and relationships we have with them, and there's a great ecosystem of cooperation where we're helping them, they're helping us, and they're doing the surveillance of their own exchanges. But one of the things that we're doing is the cross-market surveillance. And the reason that's important is go back to the beginning of when I was talking about the different types of venues where you can execute on and the complexity this creates for regulators. Today, a bad actor can try to mask their trading activity by going to many different venues, or maybe even partnering with somebody and having their order volume split over many different venues. And what we've seen is a high number of the alerts that we have suggest that there's trading activity happening that's problematic and needs to be investigated, happening over more than one venue, or happening, originating from more than one broker-dealer. And if you weren't looking at this the way we are, as a single integrated ecosystem, you wouldn't see that activity.
Right. So I think one of the things that I found interesting, I knew sort of that it was happening, but actually seeing it in action made it so much more clear to me, right? A lot of people, when we think about what FINRA does, we think, oh, they spot some problems and they make referrals to the SEC or they do their own enforcement actions. But in fact, this zone in which they're taking in all this data, normalizing it, and then analyzing it is actually allowing them to not only they get these alerts, right, but they can also look at threat scenarios, and they can also share information back with the industry in the form of report cards, essentially, which is, I think, very powerful and helpful. I don't know if you want to say a few words about that.
No, it's a great point. We're constantly trying to come up with new ideas, but the concept is sometimes we're sitting on information that would be valuable in the hands of the compliance people at our member firms and help them see where they stack up relative to everyone else in the industry, or help them see a piece of the data that we see. And so we have a whole series of report cards that are available to our member firms. They can go and look and see how we're looking at the data. And sometimes we've seen that the instances of problematic activity that we have observed have gone down when we provide a report card. And it's not because they're necessarily circumventing our surveillance. It's because, go back to the example I gave before, maybe there's bad trading activity coming in through two broker-dealers, maybe through Hillary's broker-dealer and through my broker-dealer. I wouldn't know that if no one told me, and Hillary wouldn't know it. But if we provide a report card that suggests, hey, your trading flow is interacting with someone else's, and then they can have the information to take steps. This doesn't mean that getting a report card doesn't mean that we're not grading people. It's not that type of report card. It's more, here's some information that we think is of interest, and we ask the firm to focus on it as well.
And I know just from being on the board, and I don't know if everybody in here knows that the FINRA board is composed half of industry members and half plus one of public governors. But industry finds this extremely helpful, this kind of information share that just helps them do their job better without actually, I mean, if you can get the report card and the information and get ahead of it, you can not only avoid regulatory action, but just do your job better and perhaps create some efficiencies inside your firm.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you raised that, because it's, part of when I think about what is FINRA's role in the regulatory framework, And why don't we just ask the SEC to do all of what FINRA does? I think there are a number of answers there, and we could spend some time talking about it. But one of the answers is that as a self-regulatory organization, FINRA can work with its members to both give them information in a way that you wouldn't normally expect the government to do, but more generally to provide compliance tools and resources to firms. And it's not relieving them of the obligation they have to comply with the rules. And believe me, we still hold them accountable for doing that. But if you empower them to do that, we're that much closer to achieving our mission of investor protection.
Right, right. So now we just did this sort of big talk about all the data FINRA has, but there's this thing called CAT, and one might wonder why we need CAT in light of all of the data that FINRA has. But why don't we just spend a couple minutes on CAT? We have this November 15th deadline coming up and the SRO press release that just came out. Obviously, this is a process that FINRA has been involved in from the beginning, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you think we are in the process and why we need CAT and whatever else.
So I'm going to assume general familiarity with CAT because it's a long story. But I think as people know, the Consolidated Audit Trail, or CAT, is something that came through an SEC rulemaking that was really intended to promote the ability of regulators to have a consolidated view of the markets. Frankly, at the time that CAT was proposed, what we just described basically didn't exist. It's been developed in the meantime. But the CAT project is continuing. The next phase of implementation is November 15th, where that's really the first phase of reporting into the CAT by the exchanges. And then the subsequent phases will involve reporting by the industry into the CAT. And that next phase for that is targeted for a year from November 15th. So I should make clear, FINRA doesn't speak, it's a consortium of the SROs, of which FINRA is a member and all the other members are exchanges. There are 22 different entities in it, and so FINRA is one of 22 votes, so we do not speak for or certainly do not govern the operations of the CAT on our own. But we've been very supportive of developing the CAT all along because we think that it does add some to the environment that we were just describing. Number one, it makes it mandatory. And the arrangement we have today is by bilateral agreements between us and the exchanges. This would make it mandatory for everybody, all the exchanges. Number two, it adds some information we don't have now about options, about certain linkages of certain orders, so it would enrich the data set. And number three, it would add in beneficial owner information, which is there's some controversy around that. And number four, it would now be available to all the SROs, could look at this pot of data as opposed to just FINRA today, and that also presents some questions about how will regulation work in this new environment where all the SROs have access to this pool of data. But it's a complicated project, no doubt. It's a year behind schedule. This first phase that we're talking about, November 15th, was meant to come last November, and frankly, this is the easy phase. It's easy compared to what FINRA does now, and it's easy compared to the phase to come of reporting by the industry. But I think to tie it really back to what we were talking about before, I think it's important for people to know we're not flying blind while the CAT's being built. There's a lot of market surveillance and oversight, very extensive oversight that we were just talking about that's happening independent of the CAT. And we're going to keep doing that until the CAT is up and running and we can rely on the data. And as I just described, given some of those timelines, that's going to be some period of time. So FINRA is committed to continuing to provide the market oversight that we do, working with the exchanges in the meantime.
So I think there's also a couple of key issues going forward with CAT. You mentioned, one of them, which is the regulatory environment and quite how that's going to work out. And I think one concern that some people have had is perhaps not understanding the depth of what FINRA is already doing, this question about not only were we flying blind, but what happens if we cut that off for the people that did understand it. And we've already answered that. We're not stopping what FINRA does in the meantime until everybody is sure that there's an alternative system, and then there's still layers to be negotiated and solved in that space. But What we didn't talk about is the PII. You want to say anything about that?
So that's a reference to the beneficial owner information that the plan that was approved by the SEC calls to be included within the CAT, meaning information about everyone who has a securities account. So if you have a securities account, your information would be in this pool. And so there's been concerns expressed about collecting that information and the security of it. I know the SECs and the SROs are taking those concerns very seriously, and there are lots of conversations going on about what's the right path forward, but that certainly has been raised as a significant concern. And that's something that we don't collect now. So we don't collect through our audit trail information about the beneficial owners of the account. Yes, we're a regulatory agency, so sometimes we find out who the customers of a broker are on a on-demand basis when we're doing an examination. But we don't up front pull all that information in and store it into a database. But as Hillary said, we'll keep our FINRA audit trail until there's a workable CAT. And please don't say we won't cut the fat until we have a CAT, because that would be...
I would never have said
okay.
that. But you did.
Yes, well, I'll give someone will take that up with me later, I'm sure.
Okay. So I just want to say, if you didn't catch it, that we didn't really say much about the beneficial ownership stuff and the PII, and that's because we don't actually know what the outcome is yet, right? But we wanted to put that out there. And we are going to do Q&A in a little bit here, so people will certainly have an opportunity to ask Robert all kinds of questions. Before we do that, we wanted to put out just a couple of other things that are sort of ongoing at FINRA, and a report that I found really interesting, which is the recent report that the FINRA Foundation did on millennials. So they did some research. There's, I think, a lot of misconceptions about, well, I'll just say misconceptions about millennials in general, but in this case, about millennials in the investment zone. And the millennial report really takes a pretty good dive into that. The millennials are really the largest population group since the baby boomers. And it turns out that we all in the financial industry had a lot of assumptions about millennials, which this report actually says weren't true. And the information is pretty useful. I know industry people have found it quite useful, and maybe we can get you to say a few words about it, Robert.
Sure. I do think this is an interesting study that we did, or the foundation did, with the CFA Institute. We partnered on the research, and it is part of the mandate of the foundation to help promote research and ultimately investor education, and part of that's understanding what are the needs and challenges facing investors. And hence the focus on, well, not a lot has been done on the millennial investors. And I think the report, it's readily available on our website if you haven't seen it yet. And I urge you to look at it because it's presented in a pretty...
I think we have some copies of it
maybe
here
some copies
today
in the
as
back.
well, outside,
Yeah.
if anybody wants an actual... If there's a millennial here who wants a print copy, I think they don't print anything anymore, but there are some outside.
Yes, so we call it the 7 myths of millennial investing because, as Hillary alluded to, the research identified that some of our assumptions about how millennials engage with investing were rebutted by this research. So, for example, one of the assumptions is that they love everything. They grew up in the digital age, right? So they want everything electronically, and they really want to use robo-advice. And the research suggested that while some, of course, do, there's really no greater interest in that than for other segments, like the baby boomers or the Gen X's, that maybe our assumptions there are misplaced. Sometimes people characterize millennials as being very confident about, and so let's presume they'd be very confident about investing as well. And the research suggests that, like many investors, it's a challenge for them. They feel like they need more information, and that there's an opportunity there, obviously, for those who could provide advice to them to sort of understand what their needs are. Another assumption has to do with, that they have great mistrust of the financial services industry and therefore of financial advisors. And this research suggests that that too may not be entirely accurate, that they have a greater level of trust in an individual advisor and understand the value of the expertise that an advisor could bring. I think another myth that's built into the report, or summarized in the report, is that they assume that they need too many assets to get advice, and that the cost will be low of getting advice. And the findings suggest that they actually think they can get advice for a really small amount, to help them manage a really small amount of money, but they assume they're going to get charged a lot for it, like much more than it would be typical. So again, I think it's an interesting read for anyone who's interested in the delivery of advice and what the needs are and the concerns are of millennial investors.
Right. So Robert and I have a lot more material, but we also only have 10 minutes left. So I want to invite people, if they want to step up to a mic and ask a question, please stand up and do that. And then otherwise, we'll just keep going. I see a person there, I think. It's hard to see y'all.
Yeah. Thanks for your presentation. My name is Li Yang. Since you have a very big challenge, but I want to go from the basic data and analysis. Currently, a lot of data are phony, faulty, because nobody go to verify the objective meaning of the data. Let's say a government, whether local or federal, you spend, let's say, $10 million for something, but then 10 million something different for education, but it's not really for education. They divert the resource to somewhere else, the same as land, the same as any social program. So I just want to know, how do you verify those data? So far, I don't find any agency go to verify that, including Census Bureau, because especially if you didn't verify that, then those go to the negative production. Just like employment, lower unemployment doesn't mean it's good, because employment means negative productivity. Like a financial institution, go to hack people's computer, go to rob people's assets, resources, their car, their home, everything. So we must verify this and have examined all those and analysis right.
Well, thank you. I think.
And I also want to mention that currently, because of all this, there's a lot of bad legislation, and we must counter our previous effort to do it right, especially currently PPP, public-private partnership, there's extremely fraud and crime, including murder. So it just expand to almost everywhere now, almost every agency. So, and they can bring people to jail just about anything, and including the National Academy of Science, NIH, Small Business Administration, HART, everything. So we must counter this trend. Don't allow the industry or private sector take over the government. Government can produce a Nobel Prize winner, but if you do that the other way around, they take all the profit. And so everything to the taxpayer is very costly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we obviously don't, our mandate is much more limited than the broader macroeconomic issues of job reports and the like. But I will say that the integrity of the data we collect is a big deal for us, because our ability to analyze what's happening in the market is only as good as the accuracy of the data. And this is hard. It's a hard task for the member firms who are charged with reporting it in. It's complicated. It's resource intensive. But we do hold our members accountable for making those reports accurately. And it is certainly a part of our examination and enforcement program when we find lapses in trade reporting by our firms. We certainly pursue that.
Robert, you've talked about the use of data at FINRA. I'm just curious as to what kinds of people are you hiring that have the skills to deal with the data? And really my interest is I'm trying to figure out at a business school or a law school, how should we be training our students?
It's a great question. And I think, the fact of the matter is we're looking for a wide range of talent all the time to help support this activity. We need people who have regulatory expertise to understand what the rules mean and how they work. We need people with market expertise to understand how trading happens in the markets, understand the lingo, to understand what common practices are, what's customary and usual, what's not. We need people with strong investigative skills, because the art of investigating something is its own unique skill set. We also, though, of course, need strong technologists, people who are very capable in managing the technology infrastructure that has to support all this. And then add to all of that, we need data scientists, people who are capable of helping us and make sure we have the latest tools and skill sets to analyze this data. One of the things that we're doing is to help reinforce our tools in this area is to develop machine learning and artificial intelligence, and we have people who are very proficient in that, but that's certainly an area, frankly, we're not the only ones looking for resources in that area. A lot of people are, so it's a challenging market. It's a great market to be in from the job candidate perspective. So
I'd say it's probably
one
one of the best opportunities, not just at FINRA, but elsewhere, but certainly at FINRA. FINRA has amazing strength in this area, but it is a deeply competitive market.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm a data scientist with Bloomberg Law. And I think that answer completely preempted my question. But
you're going to ask anyway.
Yeah, but just really quick to Professor Agarwal, you should also include the Public Policy School, which we shared a building with, and I'm an alum of. But anyways, so how are you, implementing machine learning and other data science techniques into your auditing and compliance and regulatory workflow? Does that include real-time auditing and regulatory work? And my second part is, do you anticipate that extending to cryptocurrency markets as well in the future?
And you just can't avoid crypto no matter how hard you try,
It's like the bingo word. It comes up everywhere, right? So I should just be clear that the types of analysis we're doing is it's post-trade and it's not real time, right? So we get the trade reporting into us within a few days of the trading happening at the outer end, but the trade report, the sort of real-time live surveillance of what's happening on an exchange or an ATS is done by the operator of that. So the SROs who manage exchanges do that. But we're using machine learning, for example. I mentioned the algorithms that we have to run patterns over the data. There's a lot of human resources involved in developing and sort of training those algorithms to look for the right types of information and to sort through the haystack to find the pins that we're looking for. That's one key area we're using machine learning to help accelerate the process of rolling out those patterns and to make them more efficient. We actually just had a great create-a-thon within FINRA, though. We had over 500 people participating in this on how to apply AI and machine learning, not just to this data set, but to other data sets we have, like the data we collect during our examination, or how do we use natural language processing to more quickly review filings with us. And so there's a lot of work going on in other parts of FINRA besides the market oversight area that I just mentioned, we were just talking about. There's someone at the mic here. Oh, no, someone here. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Renee.
Okay. So I'm Dave Weisberger. I'm now the CEO of a company called CoinRoutes, so I've gone to the dark side of crypto, too.
Here we go again.
Since it was just broached. I was talking at lunch with one of your colleagues about FINRA and the role that it could play in crypto, and I'm curious about your opinion. I've had multiple conversations with a lot of broker-dealers who are terrified of you. And frankly, from where I sit at the industry...
Look how gentle he is.
No, not of Robert, who I know is nothing to be terrified of and I have respect for. I just meant of FINRA in general. And so there is a pervasive opinion among most broker-dealers that they want to trade crypto for their customers, but they're going to put it in Bermuda entities or other offshore things. There's a very famous example of a company that is a regulated broker-dealer that has offering for retail that is not in their broker-dealer, et cetera. But from where I sit, I think a lot of people agree with this, professionalism as denoted by the way broker-dealers operate, know your customer rules, best execution rules, understanding of a lot of the things that we do, and well, I don't do anymore, but have done in the past that FINRA oversees would be really good for the industry. How do you look at that kind of fine line where you might be able to be a force for change positively without scaring off the broker-dealer community to kind of push everything offshore or away from you?
I think this is a great question because I think it goes to and it's not unique to crypto, frankly. Whenever there's a new innovative product or innovative market of some kind, the challenge for the regulator is, how do I make sure that investors are protected and also foster innovation? Sometimes you hear from people, well, we want really clear rules. And so why don't you come out with a rule book on cryptocurrency or something? And the problem with that is that if we do that too quickly, we now shape how that market develops. And we foreclose avenues of innovation that might otherwise occur and that, frankly, we might have been fine with. And so one of the challenges for us in this as in other areas is to figure out how do we help support it while doing what I think we all want to do, which is to protect investors, because whatever the industry is, it's not going to be good for it if there's a reputation for investor harm. And so part of how we're trying to do that is to engage actively with our firms who are interested in this to make sure we understand it. This is part of our innovation outreach initiative that we've been engaged in. We've been holding a series of roundtables with fintech companies around the country. We established a new advisory committee in the last year to help us understand fintech issues and to really have a two-way dialogue, because I think that's where it starts, is to make sure that we understand what the issues or concerns are, and then work closely with the SEC to help figure out are there rules, if there are rules that are presenting interpretive issues for the development of this market, how do we make sure that those are being, those interpretations are being developed in a way that allows innovation up to the point of not compromising on investor protection.
So we have one last question up here at this mic, please.
Hi, my name's Genevieve at Walker Lightfoot. I have a question concerning the CAT and consolidating trade data. As someone who worked on the American Stock Exchange pre-9/11, and I worked for 5 years in OC here in DC, and then also at the Federal Reserve Board in bank supervision, focusing on securities activities in banks, I've seen a lot of different scenarios. So when you talk about, FINRA retaining its structure as far as looking at trade data, but then also this consolidated view, maybe looking for patterns or just different scenarios that you would not traditionally see, perhaps in looking at just trades on one exchange or in one market, I believe that's going to affect how the rules will work, because oftentimes, as we know, many of the rules are written in such a way that they relate to one market or one actor or one scenario. Block trades, for example, or any type of market manipulation, when you talk about affecting trades across, spreading them out or using more than one actor, that's going to give you a larger permutation of potential violations than are currently written into our rules. So I'm just wondering, how will the rules evolve with looking at more consolidated data?
It's a great question, and I frankly, I don't think we know the answer to that. I do think that as FINRA has developed its own, with the exchanges, again, a consolidated view of the markets, yes, we've seen things that we wouldn't have seen before or understood to be, areas of concern. And then I think, and this is good because we want to take a data-driven approach to our regulatory framework, right? It doesn't, now often the old rules still, make sense, I think, especially the ones that are more principles-based, like manipulation or that sort of thing. Right. But sometimes, of course, a part of our job is to look at rules that may have been designed for a prior regulatory framework or a prior sort of market framework, and maybe some of the rules won't make sense anymore, or they'll need updating. Right. And I think that's certainly, as our view of the markets has improved through the development of our audit trail, I think, we've seen some opportunities there, and I think the same may be true with the consolidated audit trail.
Yeah, I just think about robo-advisors and how, the guidance that came out last year, and how it's a very different way of looking at advisors, and how that begets new viewpoints and new rules and new types of examinations. So.
Yep.
Right. And I will just say that as part of the FINRA 360 that Robert has done, FINRA has looked at lots of rules that members have raised and worked on whether, which ones should be recalibrated in some fashion. So it is an ongoing process, and I agree that CAT will present more opportunities for that. So we are completely out of time. Thank you, Robert,
very much.
so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.